I don't think it's any surprise really that we're living in what we might call liminal times. Things are quite uncertain globally, sociopolitically, with our climate, widespread conflict and war, systemic forms of racism and oppression, which we won't be going into in any specific way in this course, but just to name that. And how all of this instability and groundlessness has a way of being mirrored in our own individual psyche and soma. I mean, if the earth and her body are shaky, tender, and weeping, we might even say, we too, we too will be shaky, tender, and weeping, which may appear for us as actual physical tears, of course, from time to time. But there are also a layer of tears that flow from more deeply within what we call the subtle body or the soul. Expressions of a sort of longing or a grieving for what we might call the unlived life, something I'm sure we'll speak more about. And the deep cultural and collective shadow that goes along with all of this shakiness, this inner and outer groundlessness, and how all of that undigested, unprocessed feeling affects not only our perception, but also our relationship with ourselves, with others, with the sacred. And it also has a way of shifting our psychic center of gravity out of that natural center and balance and into states of arousal, into fight, flight, shut down, freeze, collapse, often without our conscious knowing that that's happening. I mean, we might just have a sense that things feel a bit off, that we're a bit shaky or anxious or really tired, but aren't actually sure what's really going on underneath all of that. Somehow it's just become the status quo in a sense. There's a way that our psyches and especially our nervous systems have been toned or tuned to be on the lookout, to be guarded, to be on the lookout for cues of danger, for threat. As if we're asking ourselves, at a subtle, sort of unconscious level, am I safe? Is it safe here? Is there something wrong? Am I okay? Is it safe to fully show up here as myself, with all of my embodied vulnerabilities, sensitivities, eccentricities? Is that actually going to be safe? Am I going to be held by others, by life, by the divine? It's like a soul level sort of restlessness or a deep exhaustion and tiredness that many of us can experience from time to time, at least, some sense that we're shutting down. And all of these responses, the restlessness and the anxiety, and also the tiredness and that collapse, that numbing, that flatlining. These responses, in my experience, are quite coherent. And they actually make a lot of sense given the energies that are moving in the collective right now. And so there can be a real sense of groundlessness out there, which of course is mirrored in here. Like we can't quite find our center, that centerlessness can manifest as all sorts of what we would call psychological symptoms, existential forms of anxiety, of depression, of or just a flatness, a dullness, a certain sort of meaninglessness that so many report. And so these periods of uncertainty, if we look historically and also through the reports of the great alchemists, the mystics, the yogis, the poets of all times and places, we see that these are also these moments or times of profound opportunity when a doorway appears or a portal opens into soul that just isn't available when everything is clear and certain and being held together. I think of Rumi, of course, or St. John of the Cross, or Teresa of Avila, the crew. The wound, the felt sense of separation is the place where the light enters us, as Rumi said. And as always with Rumi, this isn't just poetry. I mean, of course, we can appreciate the poetic beauty of what Rumi's speaking or some of the other poets, but deeper than that, deeper than just that beauty, which is a lot, it's an invitation into a primary first-person experience, into that unfolding of a direct revelation into the alchemical laboratory of our own bodies and nervous systems and hearts. It's an invitation from Rumi and also from the center of being itself that Rumi is a personification of for some of us. Without that brokenness, without that crack in reality, that fissure in the armor of the heart, how will the light incarnate here? How will it find its way? And of course, this idea, this direct revelation and experience lies at the very heart of any sort of path of the wounded healer, which I know some of you probably really relate to. And just to know that that's alive, that mandala of the wounded healer is alive in each of us in these times, in my experience, the way I've come to see it, whether or not we identify as some sort of professional healer or not. Each of us has access to healing vectors in psyche and soul in Soma that are longing to move through us and out into the world. In other words, the wounded healer isn't a profession, despite how it's often portrayed out there in our consumeristic, materialistic world as an Instagram meme, which is fine. But it's a dimension of consciousness, an archetypal atmosphere of direct experience with its own wisdom, images, feelings, and intuitions. It's more like a place or a location, not in the anatomy of the physical body, but in the anatomy of the soul, in the anatomy of the inner or the subtle body, if you like. There's a word in the Tibetan language that you may have heard of called Bardo, Bardo, which points to this liminal or transitional time that we're living in, where we're between one thing and another, archetypally speaking, between death and rebirth. Each of us, as well as collectively, culturally, ancestrally. And that's not necessarily going to be all that comfortable, is it? I mean, how could it be? It's not easy to rest in that, or to play in that, or to relax into that. And from within the liminal and this felt sense of groundlessness that tends to go along with that, it's not easy to explore in what Winnicott called those more unstructured states of consciousness. those very natural and healing and vital human experiences such as wonder, awe, play, and that causeless joy of just being itself. You know, experiences which so many of us have been disconnected with. And especially for those of us with any sort of history of traumatic or post-traumatic stress, which is many more of us than I think we've come to imagine, that ubiquity of traumatic organization in body and soma and psyche and soul, you know, accessing and abiding in these unstructured states and that causeless joy and that resting in true being itself, you know, can evoke a profound disorientation, shakiness, even a survival level sort of panic, and or even a potential sense of a certain kind of inner annihilation even.